Hey College and Career Success, this video is for week 4 of our summer semester, which means after this week you are halfway done already with this course. So hopefully that's exciting and can maybe be a little bit of a motivator. I know especially as the weather is getting nicer, I'm sure a lot of you, including myself, it's harder to focus and do things for academics when the weather is so nice. And so hopefully just knowing that you're halfway there is going to be a bit of a help. Okay, so last week I know you had several things because we had those career assignment in there, but I hope you really benefited, especially those of you who are maybe high school students still or your first semester of college. You're either not sure what you want to go into or you're just new to your field. And so hopefully just finding those resources was helpful to you. And even if you've been in the field for a while, just kind of seeing the up-to-date like employment, who's hiring, information about the particular field, and that you can go to our office on campus and get help with your resume and interviewing and things that you're going to be doing as you get ready to exit the college. All right, so this week, week 4, we're in chapter 3. So you'll see here's kind of just the introduction to the chapter, to the week, and then the items that you'll be working on. So I'm going to start off with, if I go into my materials folder, I'm going to pull up the chapter 3 slides. I'm going to go through chapter 3, kind of go through just a real quick rundown of what I would normally talk to you about had I had the opportunity to face-to-face. So chapter 3 starts discussing how memory works. And so I always like to kind of think about how we intake information, and our text uses this model of memory. We have the environment, so we see, hear, taste, sense, whatever senses we're using, we take it in. We're aware of it. It kind of stays in our working memory. Sometimes we develop that into short-term memory and then to long-term memory, but it's not just a magical process. There are things that have to happen before it gets to that long-term memory. And a lot of misconceptions, or maybe not misconceptions, just not knowing, is that you can actually hold knowledge in your long-term memory forever. Knowledge never goes away. It's the reason we cannot access that information or we forget things is because we don't practice retrieving it, which makes sense when we're not going to practice retrieving things from when we were an infant or 1 or 2 years old. And so therefore it just kind of fades into the very back of our long-term memory and we can no longer access that. So it's always there. It's just a matter of how do we access that information. So here's kind of the first part of that memory process. We encode information. We pay attention to what we think is important, what we see, what we hear, what we read, and we kind of filter through that. And then what a lot of research will say is using multisensory approach works best. So if you can read something, but also hear it, and also see it, and also, read it yourself out loud, whatever modes you can, multiple approaches is going to help you recall the information more. So when you work with the information, you take it in, and you have kind of what it says, you can remember approximately like 7 items, plus or minus 2 at one time, whether that's 7 numbers, 7 terms, it kind of varies. That's how long you can have it in there. And there are different strategies to kind of help you remember it. And so I'm going to talk about these strategies here. So one of the strategies is called chunking. And so you might be able to already tell like how you would break this down, but let's say you got this list of letters. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Well, chunking would take it and put it in these chunks. So like, okay, this made no sense, but now I can see the pieces and parts, and that makes more sense to me. So that is a chunking strategy. Elaboration is just what it sounds like. You have an idea or a concept, and you elaborate on it. Maybe you attach an example to it. Maybe you come up with a story. You build on it so it's more meaningful. And then mnemonics is when you kind of come up with different maybe acrostics or word association. For example, maybe you learned the acronym HOMES, HOMES, helps you remember all the Great Lakes, Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, Superior. Like that's kind of an example of a mnemonic device. PEMDAS is one in math. So those are ways to chunk, elaborate mnemonics. Those are all ways to kind of increase your capacity to take something from your working or short-term memory and store it in your long-term. And the reason we do it this way is because think of like a filing cabinet. If you just throw in files kind of willy-nilly, fun little term there, just haphazardly, it's going to be more difficult for you to retrieve those files. However, if you have a system, usually maybe alphabetical, numerical, and you know kind of where you're supposed to look or how you filed that, it's going to be easier to get out of there. So same thing with our memory. If we can use these strategies to file in our long-term memory, it's going to be easier for us to retrieve. And then there's the retrieval part. It goes back to the more organized you store your information, the easier it's going to retrieve. So how do you retrieve information? Well, you got to practice it. If you learn information on a Monday and you have a test on Friday, but you don't work with it between Monday and Friday, odds are it's going to be really difficult for you to retrieve it. So you have to chunk it, you have to practice it, you have to elaborate, you have to study and review. And then maybe you store it in different ways, and then you practice retrieving it. You do flashcards, you do practice quizzes, you do study groups. Whatever study material, study methods you prefer, that's going to help you practice retrieval so that when it comes time for your test, you've already practiced getting that information out of your memory. It becomes a little easier. All right, also in this chapter it talks about active reading, and this is kind of my area with developmental reading. I love talking about reading strategies, so I'll try to keep it brief the best I can. So reading, it really does, if you have a lot of prior knowledge, it's going to make it easier for you to read something. So think about anytime you've read anything, if you already knew about it, it makes the new information that you're reading about the topic that much easier. But if you have zero prior knowledge on something, whether it's a 2-page article or a 20-page article, if you've never heard of it before, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. And so to kind of build prior knowledge, maybe you'll look at a table of contents on a textbook. Maybe you'll do a quick search online and just kind of get some real basic information, because if you can build prior knowledge before reading, it makes it that much easier. There's also different methods. The 3R and the SQ3R kind of go together. The 3R is just really basic. It talks about how reading is basically a process. You shouldn't just like jump right in. There are steps to take, which is why I kind of rely more heavily on the SQ3R here. So before you start reading something, you should survey or preview the chapter. You know, some of you might already do this. Oh, how long is this? You know, you look and see how many pages you have to read. Or you just look and see, okay, what's the topics? How is this organized? How many pages? What do the pictures look like? And then set some questions up. What questions can you create or pose to look for the answers so that you have a goal while you read, so you're not just kind of dazing in and out and not focusing? It gives you a focus. You read a section at a time, so not the entire chapter or the entire article. Chunk it, maybe a page, a couple pages at a time, so you're not doing too much. And then don't take notes or highlight while you're reading. Read the section, then go back and read and take the notes and highlight. Recite. Write a summary of what you've read or say a summary, because if you can put things into your own words, that's how you know you understood it. And then review. Maybe you need to go back to the read section because you've missed something or you don't understand something. So using these strategies, although it might take you longer, it's going to save you time in the long run because you're embedding that information more to your long-term memory because you're actually working and paying attention to that. So this kind of talks about what I've briefly hinted on, highlighting, just like underlining, taking notes. It's effective if you use it properly, but if you don't use it properly, then it defeats the purpose. So generally the rule of thumb is about 25%, or it says about 1 or 2 sentences per paragraph, so that you're not highlighting the whole darn page. And usually you want to read first, then go back and highlight, because while you're reading, you often think, oh, everything's important. But after you're done reading, you have some insight, like, oh, you know what, this was really the key section. Chapter 3 also goes into some note-taking kind of tips and strategies. So part of note-taking obviously is the physical act of note-taking, but it's also being prepared for class. Knowing what's coming, reading the chapter ahead of time, knowing when your assignments are due, maybe having questions ready to ask, and then in class, making eye contact with the speaker, active listening, not just writing down everything they say, but kind of really looking for the key points, which if you read the chapter ahead of time, you already have an insight as to what those key points are. It goes into, if you don't review your notes or you don't review, you're going to forget, which we know this. If you don't review, you're going to forget that information. There are lots of different ways to take notes. There's lots of different note-taking apps if that's interesting to you. The least effective way to take notes is kind of what they call this linear way, where you just write in sentences, no clear format. A more effective way would be an outline, if you like the format of an outline, which a lot of people typically use for writing, but can also be used for reading and taking notes. And then Cornell method, which is a really structured way, where on the left-hand side here, you have like your heading, your question, your topic, and then on the right-hand side, you fill in a little bit more detail. And then if you're a visual person, these are even more effective depending on how you see the information. Concept mapping or matrix mapping. Some general, again, kind of continuing on with the thought of note-taking tips. So when you're in an actual lecture, I know this is different than when you're online, but when you're in an actual lecture, face-to-face, whenever the instructor repeats information, puts things on the board, gives examples, or they spend a lot of time on it, or maybe their voice quickens and there's more passion, those are definitely things you want to take note of and write down in your notes. And then it starts to kind of ease into the study strategies, different ways to make more effective use of your study time. If you can use as many senses as possible, that's effective. But there's this concept called picture superiority effect, meaning if you can attach an image to your concept or your idea, you might remember it better. This effect says that memory for images is stronger than our memory for words. So if you're learning vocabulary, if you can learn the term and the definition, but also attach a picture to it, it might help you remember more. Testing your knowledge, testing effect. This goes back to retrieval. Practice testing. Practice getting the information out in a format. So if you can practice, such as flashcards, practice tests, maybe writing summaries, studying with the group, that's going to put the testing effect into practice. You're going to practice retrieving information, and therefore it's going to make the actual test a little easier because you've already practiced that. And then also if you can teach someone, that's a great way to know that you understand what's going on. If you can teach someone else what you've learned, you know you've got it. And then in general, some study group tips. If you are working in a group, which I know often people are not huge fans of, but there's different ways our chapter talks about you can make it more successful. Having different roles, having ground rules, and things of that nature. And then again, organizing information and paying attention to your study plan. So that is the overview of Chapter 3. I'm going to go back up here, and we're going to get into our actual assignments here. So if I go down to the assignment area, here's your Chapter 3 discussion. I want to stress again, 250 words. So if you want to open up a Word document, type it in there so it can give you your word count. I can go in here and it's going to give me my word count. I'm going to know how many words I'm typing. Then I can copy and paste it into my discussion. Here is my prompt. Write a brief summary. So again, a brief summary, so a paragraph of what you recall from last week's class. So last week was week 3 over Chapter 2. So basically kind of summarize what you gained from Chapter 2, whether it was the actual chapter, maybe it had something to do with the career services information, just a quick summary, and then pose 2 questions that would require classmates to look into the chapter or the other concepts a little bit more further into exploration. That is your discussion. 250 words or more in the discussion forum. You click in there, create thread, and then respond to 2 classmates. Your attendance post is due Wednesday, June 24th for week 4 attendance, and then you must respond to 2 classmates by Sunday, June 28th. Some of you are still forgetting to respond to your classmates. All right, that's the discussion. Next, these 2 go together. You're going to click in here because part of this chapter talked about memory. So you're going to click in here. It's going to open up this little survey. It's one of these again. It's going to walk you through and it's going to ask you to kind of remember a list of words. And then you're going to see how well you did. That's the first part of it. I can't see that. What I will see is when you go in here, you click in there and it's going to have the questions again there and you can click write in submission, or if you want to do it in a Microsoft Word document, How many words were you able to remember? Which words did you forget? And what technique did you use? So that's 2 parts. You have to first do the test your memory assignment, then answer those 3 questions. I will not see your actual your memory results. You have to respond to these questions. All right, almost done through the assignments. The next one is your Chapter 3 quiz. So just like your Chapters 1 and 2, please answer your questions in 2 to 5 sentences. Some of you are only writing like a few words or 1 sentence. Remember, this is online, so you have access to your textbook, to the PowerPoint, to other resources. So that's why I'm really making it like a hard and fast rule, 2 to 5 sentence response, because you have resources at your disposal. So pay attention to these questions. Like first couple, it's going to talk about memory processes, some of the concepts we talked about, how can you get the most out of class. It's going to talk about note-taking methods, multisensory. So there are 10 questions in this particular quiz. Please, again, make sure you answer in 2 to 5 sentences. And then when you're done, save it as a Word document, upload it into that particular area. The last assignment is your college resource reflection for this week, which is student life. So I'm going to have you go ahead. You'll click on that link that's in there, and it'll take you here. You'll have to click again. It's going to take you to the student organization page, and you can see we actually have a lot of student organizations here on campus. You might be surprised to see that. So I want you to go ahead and scroll through and maybe just take a look. Are there any that are interesting to you? You want to find more about? Whenever you find one, you click on it. And it's going to give you a quick description and who the advisor is. So I encourage you to kind of pay attention to those. Look around. When you have done that, the reflection is basically saying, find 1 to 3 of the organizations that you might be interested in potentially joining. You don't have to join these. You do not have to join them. You don't have to contact anyone. It's just what looks interesting. Like, why? There's some personal ones in here as well as professional. Comic book club. That'd be more personal for fun. Now, there's the, criminal justice. That's more professional. So look, 1, 2, or 3 of them. Which ones would you be interested in joining? Why? What would be the benefit of getting involved on campus or joining a club or organization? Tell me why you would potentially look into these clubs or organizations that you chose. That's your reflection. Okay, so that is your assignments for week 4, chapter 3. You are completing your chapter 3 discussion where you're reflecting on last week's material. So chapter 2 back in week 3, doing like a summary and then posing 2 questions. You're going to test your memory and respond to these 3 questions. And then you're going to take the chapter 3 quiz and the college resource reflection on student life. Now you'll notice in your syllabus and also in the announcements and right here, I'm going to introduce the final projects this week. I'm going to do that in a separate video, so it's just focused on the final projects. And I'm really going to hone in on just steps 1 and 2, and then I'll eventually kind of add the rest of them. So this is your week 4 video. Remember, attendance post by Wednesday, June 24th. All other assignments, including responding to 2 classmates, will be due by Sunday, June 28th. Hope you are all doing well, and then I'll be back here with your final project video. I'll do that in a separate video.